Welcome back to the show. Well, as France gears up for summer holidays, we are winding down this year's series with a flashback to some of the issues that marked the EU's year. A year that was made up of a series of crises, terrorism, Brexit and migration, none of which are settled. Slovakia took over the rotating presidency of the EU on July 1st. The country, led by Robert Fico, is suing the bloc over plans to resettle refugees. Fico says he's against any compulsory quota system and vowed not to allow refugees from the Middle East to establish a united Muslim community in his country. In February, Slovakia did allow a few dozen Iraqi Christian refugees in. Johan Bodin went to meet them.
At these old Slovakian barracks, now a camp for refugees, Araz and his family have just completed the official quarantine period. In his hands, the start to a new life and approved asylum application.
This is a letter that explains our rights, but also our duties of what's expected in Slovakia. It's necessary that I understand it all, so I can know how to work and live and participate in Slovak society.
An expedited process. Araz is part of a group of 149 Iraqi Christians that a Slovakian Catholic foundation decided to help. Father Brankus chose families from Iraqi Kurdistan and now oversees their resettlement.
I believe that we have to focus on the most vulnerable people because we cannot help them all. Maybe it's not politically correct to say it, but yes, there is more space for integration of them. I believe that we can integrate also Muslims and some other people from different religions and cultures, but it will take more time, more effort.
The program has been carried out in conjunction with the Office of Migration. Traditionally, Slovakia rarely grants asylum, only 8 in the past year. With these newcomers, the government says it's stepping up its efforts to keep Brussels from interfering.
We don't want someone to tell us who we have to help. So that's why we chose the Iraqi Christians. Slovakia's position on quotas is that it's a joke, nonsense, something ridiculous. And finally, this method of transferring populations from one country to another. For me, that evokes Stalin's methods in the USSR.
According to the terms of the agreement outlining the sharing of refugees, Bratislava would host 2,500 migrants, but Slovakia has challenged this in court. The government has allowed just 500 of them to stay temporarily. Morsim and Jiwa are Syrian. They can stay for up to 6 months, the time needed for their asylum case, which was registered in Austria, to be completed.
It's better than most camps in Austria. Here I try to do all I can not to upset anyone, anywhere.
Here, the refugees, mostly Muslims, are not welcome. The mayor held a referendum to challenge even the temporary presence of these migrants.
The result is that the overwhelming majority of those who voted are against it, 97%. Will not be quiet until the last refugee finally goes.
Since the start of the migrant crisis, the government has fanned the flames of anti-Muslim sentiment. Mohammed Hasna has lived here for 25 years.
Some members of our community, special women who wear headscarves or hijab, they feel a little bit afraid. They have been some assaultations and some physical attacks.
Slovakia is the only EU country that has not officially recognized the religion of Islam. A law passed a few years ago says 20,000 members are required, impossible to achieve for a Muslim community of about 5,000.
I make mainly the speech, the sermons in 3 languages, in Arabic, Slovak and English.
Originally from Syria, Hasna has denounced the Prime Minister's call for all Muslims in Slovakia to be placed under surveillance.
These words were very unhappy, unpleasant and anti-democratic, I would say.
According to the last census, nearly 70% of the 5.5 million Slovaks call themselves Catholic, one of the highest rates in Europe, while just 0.2% identify as Muslim.
Well, following a similar line on migration, Hungary reacted to the new arrivals into the EU by building fences along its borders. It has now announced that it will hold a referendum on the EU quota system on October 2nd. Hungary has come under pressure from the EU on both its treatment of refugees and also in relation to the freedom of speech. NGOs also worried over what they see as a crackdown on media freedom there. Last September, Alix Bourdon went to find out more.
Barely 5 minutes after we arrive, Hungarian policemen stop us in our tracks. We're at Hungary's border with Croatia, recording a report on the migrant crisis. But this officer says we can't film because we're missing a particular document. The police seem to want official authorization. Only the public TV channel M1 can provide. We tried to check with M1, but they turned down all our interview requests. A journalist who agreed to speak to us pulled out at the last minute.
Kaotikus, borzalmas, tragikus, így jellemzik még az ENSZ szakértői és a Görög-szigeteken kialakult helyzetet.
We decided to watch a news bulletin on M1 with a sociologist.
Január 1-től egész nap tegnapi nap éjfélig összesen 341.934 illegális bevándorlóval szemben intézkedtek kollégáim az ország területén.
It's extremely boring and totally manipulative. They call refugees illegal or migrants because, like that, they're criminals. It's constant propaganda to create a fear of refugees.
420 million euros. That's how much the government has ploughed into public media. It's the same amount it spends on education. But public media has not attracted big audiences. The National Media Council is made up exclusively of members of the ruling Fidesz party.
I've not read anything criticizing this organization. Nomination is one thing, what's happening in practice is quite another. And I think that's more important than who's been nominated. Any EU member state has a political character.
In the studios of Hungary's biggest private TV station, it's time for the news. The 50-minute show has the largest audience in the country, but today the politics slot is brief. It's a world of difference from the bulletins broadcast in 2014 by RTL Club. When the government introduced a 40% advertising tax on the TV channel, it started producing more critical news coverage, examining alleged corruption in the Prime Minister's entourage. RTL's only rival, TV2, was exempt from the tax. It had just been bought by a close ally of Viktor Orbán.
If you're weak one day, then you do a lot of bad to your democracy. So I always ask the journalists to be brave when they ask, because that shows clearly that the press can do what they should do in a democracy.
The government backpedaled on the tax in early 2015, bringing it down to 5.3% and imposing it on all media outlets that make money from advertising. But Viktor Orbán's government still keeps a watchful eye on what's being reported. This investigative journalist used to work for Index, the largest news website in Hungary. 4 years ago, he resigned after discovering a paragraph had been taken out of one of his articles. Tamás Bodin went on to launch Adlasso, a news site paid for by donations from citizens.
On the internet, you can get critical articles and you can read investigative journalism if you are actively seeking for it. But if you just watch the TV or you listen to the radio news, then you will never know about corruption cases or other types of wrongdoings because the mainstream is strictly controlled.
6 journalists, 300,000 readers. Atlasso's impact is still small, but it offers hope for a free press in Hungary.
It was not just countries in the east of the EU that had issues with the migration question. Over 30,000 refugees arrived into Finland last year, a record for the country of some 5 million people. While some mayors saw the new arrivals as hope to replenish populations, Finland's government did start trying to get the migrants to leave, offering free return flights to Iraq. Thousands of Iraqis got on board, as Johan Bourdon reports.
The mayor of Forsa has a singular problem. Each year his town is getting emptier.
This is old cotton mill factory area.
With factories closing and young people moving to the city, the former industrial center of Forza is now in danger of becoming a ghost town.
If we don't manage in next 10 years to handle that problem of decreasing inhabitants, our companies will make investments to other cities.
But Mayor Solko may have found a solution. Some 200 refugees arrived in Forza last summer, like the Kasim family, which is now requesting asylum in Finland.
I would like to welcome all of those who live here, and especially you.
For Mayor Solko, they could be the ideal workforce to revitalize Forza's declining industry. But these refugees harbor ambitions of their own.
My dream for the future is to find the same job I had in Iraq, where I was an electrical engineer. And I want my children to go to the best schools.
While their asylum request is processed, the Kasim family receives €1,000 a month from the Finnish government. They're among the 32,500 refugees who arrived over the last year, making Finland one of the countries with the highest rate of asylum seekers in Europe. And until their demand is approved, Finnish authorities have decided to house all migrants in rural communities.
Irak käyty läpi, tai Irakin turvallisuustilanne alueelta, se vaihtelee Irakissakin.
We checked the situation for each individual region in Iraq. There are some areas like Kurdistan that are safe. So if you come from there, we don't think you're in danger. The criteria are getting stricter. We estimate only 1/3 of asylum demands will be granted.
Around 20,000 refugees will be rejected, and Finland wants to impose further restrictions on family reunification. Enough to discourage many asylum seekers, but for Ziad El Samareh, it's a golden business opportunity.
This ticket, not cancel, not change.
In the back of this second-hand shop, he recently started his own travel agency, which specifically caters to refugees who want to go back home. And lately, business has flourished.
These past 6 months, we've organized return trips for at least 5,000 Iraqis. A lot of them thought that when they got to Finland, they would be handed the key to a house and a passport, and they would stay at home and get assistance, employed to stay at home in a way. But that doesn't exist. It was in their heads.
Baman Hassan decided to pack his bags and buy a one-way ticket to Kurdistan. Like thousands of others, he was left disillusioned by the Finnish dream.
They ask us to adapt to the Finnish or European culture, but they don't make any efforts towards us. I'd rather be in Baghdad or anywhere in Iraq and risk being killed by a bomb than stay here.
The cost of his European odyssey, €8,000 and a lot of frustration.
Here in Finland, it snows for 6 months of the year, and the rest of the time it rains.
Unable to adapt, around 5,000 Iraqis have already returned home, a trend that is likely to spread as the Finnish government has begun to offer free return flights to Baghdad.
Well, EU citizens also chose to leave the bloc this year. The EU is still coming to terms with the UK's vote for a Brexit. Article 50, the official detangling or withdrawal process, has yet to be triggered, meaning that uncertainty lingers on for everyone, including Brits abroad. Claire Williams was talking to families living in France just before the vote. Here's her report.
Notice the courgettes are growing well.
Yes, you're almost stepping on those beans.
For nearly 20 years, Brian and Helen have nurtured their little corner of paradise. They left England to spend their retirement in a remote part of the Lot in southwest France, and they're apprehensive about Britain's EU referendum.
Under the European Union, we know that our pension is protected. We know we can get health care. And if Brexit happens, there is a grave danger that our pensions could be threatened.
When British retirees live in almost any country outside the EU, the value of their state pension is frozen at the date they retire or when they move. And like all British citizens who've been abroad for more than 15 years, Brian and Helen have lost the right to vote.
I, as a British citizen, are most fundamentally affected by whatever result comes of that. And yet, I am denied the vote.
Their fears are shared by Rachel, a British local councillor who lives nearby.
The British presence or the English-speaking on the council is important to allow them to integrate better.
She might have to resign if Britain leaves the EU.
At the moment, only Europeans have the right to be elected on local councils. It's a legal issue.
Please feel free.
Back at Brian and Helen's house, some British friends are over for a last drink before the referendum.
I don't know what will happen in various circumstances. Healthcare, I will be a foreigner in a country and I'll need a visa.
Someone's got to give us some answers.
If Britain leaves the EU, they'll have to make a choice. Stay in France but risk losing their rights as European citizens, or head back home.
Well, that brings us to the end of this season of our Europe shows. But don't worry, we will be keeping a close eye on all the EU issues in our news editions, and we'll be back with our magazine shows in September. See you then.